So the panel is now available for questions. There will be some roving mics in the auditorium. When you ask a question, could you please also identify yourself and who the question is directed to?
Hi, I'm Andrew Jeremenjenko. I'm an occupational physician. I just wanted to ask, I had a case recently. So normally as an occupational physician, work injuries, we try to get them back to work immediately. I had a guy who came in and he was saying that he wanted to do a mental stress, a workplace stress claim. And this may be out of school, but I actually advised him not to do it. I said it would be easier to give him a week off work, call it a viral illness, something like that, go and see psychiatrists or psychologists, get it sorted and stay away from the workers' comp system because the workers' comp system gets involved in medical legals. I didn't tell him the whole reasoning of why I was thinking this, but this is the truth. And I'm thinking with a doctor, if he came to see me and said, look, this is workplace stress, I'm mentally ill because of work, I don't think I'd want to put him on the workers' comp system either. I'd say, look, your psychiatrist will be bulk billed, there's really no advantage, you're going to be put through medical legal hell. And I feel a bit bad about that because I feel like as an occupational physician, we should be able to admit that this is a work-related illness in many cases. So I'd just like some advice on what you think about my response to that other patient who was not a doctor, and what you think we should do with doctors who have got significant work stress that's causing their mental illness.
So, who would like to answer that first?
Well, look, I think you... I'm not sure, can I be heard with this? I can be heard? Yes, thank you. I think you handled it quite expertly. Sometimes the systems that are set up by employers and where you go through the motions of respecting them actually can make the whole scenario worse. And I think we've all seen sort of fairly dramatic examples of that. So I think little white lies, or the equivalent, is not inappropriate. Having said that, many of the things that I do now, I would never have done 10 years ago. I would have chosen that sort of soft option. But as I gave the example earlier, writing to the administration at a hospital with the doctor-patient's permission, I would do quite comfortably now, and as yet, from the feedback from the doctors, there has never been a negative response by the administration where they say, okay, we've got a weak one here, or somebody who's at high risk. It's generally been quite positive. So I think we've seen the seismic change in many organisations, but not all. So I think we need to shift gradually. And of course, if you document anything, if I write on my letterhead and it sort of says psychiatrist, whatever I write is going to be understood by those who receive it as either correct if I tell the facts, or misrepresentation if I say, oh, this person needs some time off work, and I don't even mention the issue of a mood disorder. So a shifting scenario, I would suggest.
I'm David D'Souza from Auckland, New Zealand. I wonder whether, my question is sort of in several parts, any of the people on the podium heard of a person called Justitia?
I think the answer is no.
Yeah. That's rather surprising. If you go to a Supreme Court into any Western country, there is Justitia, there is no J word in Latin, it's I-U-S-T-I-T-A, but it's pronounced Justitia. There's a lady with a bandage on the face holding scales balanced.
Oh, justice.
Now, when we, as doctors or nurses, midwives, etc., we are accused of doing something to the patient, there are the health ombudsman here and a similar one in New Zealand. What happens, especially in the emergency medicine department, when they are spat at, verbally abused, physically abused? Who is the arbiter for that? Now, you people have been, a couple of people have been talking about the doctors doing things to patients, etc. If the scales are balanced in the Supreme Court, who is going to look after us?
Sorry, don't. Yes.
I don't know.
Well, I didn't
Who's
expect
gonna
to
look
reply
after us?
because
I'm
I
not
asked
quite
the
sure.
same question in Auckland, New Zealand, and there was a profound silence, a pregnant pause, no answer. So we are vulnerable. If somebody abuses me or spits at me or hits me, I just got to take it on the rump and...
No, so,
examine it.
so in relation to the mental health of doctors, how does that relate?
No, two of...
Would you yes,
what I'm-
clarify the question, perhaps?
There are patients and doctors. Why should we be talk about our mental health? But I'm saying two of the people said how the doctors have done this and that, and the last speaker talked about the health ombudsman. Who is going to look after us when something happens to us?
Yes, over here. Lonu? Yes.
I do work in another jurisdiction, and we don't have the same workers' compensation arrangements in Ireland as you do here. But I think it is my observation working as an occupational physician in a hospital that not only in relation to doctors, and I think, you know, we're here talking about doctors today, and that's the particular focus for me in my research, but we're not the only healthcare workers who are at risk. We are, I think, particularly at risk, as the suicide figures suggest, particularly for females. But I think in any organisation, in any healthcare organisation, and I'm sure it's the same here, I find when something goes wrong, for example, when there's some little hazard that may be a problem for patients, something is broken or something that metaphorically trips patients up, everybody rallies to fix that, to make sure it doesn't happen again. And when a similar kind of a thing pertains to staff generally, nobody's really interested. It gets back to the issue of advocacy, I guess, and the role that those of us who work in occupational health have to advocate for all of the workers. So I think we have a particular problem as doctors, but also generally health workers share many of the problems that we have as doctors working in a system where the entire focus is on the care of the patient. And you know, I say to managers and CEOs and people, I say, look, if you look after the workers, if you care for them and support them and reward them, and I'm not talking about money, but in the multiplicity of ways that you can support and reward people without money, then the health care will happen because people will be able to work. But I take your point. We don't get excited. You know, work goes on with the doctor who gets injured, or Mary told us very eloquently about her own experience. You know, I saw a guy, a healthcare assistant, who got a punch in the face, and the manager didn't even send him down to us, and days later he began to have problems with his vision and ended up with a retinal detachment. And the manager hadn't treated him, hadn't managed the situation, just assumed he could continue on. So I think it's not just doctors, but we are talking about doctors today. But I think we need to care for all our workers.
It's kind of, I'm not sure who wrote it, but the quadruple aim of healthcare. So I mean, there's cost, quality, access, and that's supported by the staff. And if you look after the staff, all the other stuff takes care of itself.
Yeah.
I work in a hospital in Frankston. It's a pretty robust area. We have police stationed in the ED department permanently, basically, plus security. And there's signs that, you know, and it doesn't mean anything, but there's signs saying violence is not tolerated, yada, 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 yada. But with the current sort of ICE epidemic, particularly in the area around us, where it's high, they're crazy people, you know, really violent, you know, people off their head with 8, 10 security guards and police holding them down and whacking them in rooms and stuff. So,
My question is, who is the arbiter, similar to the health ombudsman?
I don't know who the arbiter.
Who is the arbiter? That's what I
I think Stephen
So
had
look,
a comment.
I'm not sure that this is
Yes,
any
Stephen.
different in the medical workforce than it is in any other workforce. In other words, if you're referring to the role of the medical board, for example, because you referred to what I said, the medical board doesn't take sides and very much tries to balance what any notification will say against what the response is of the practitioner at the time. And as you would see from the figures that I gave, in fact, most notifications result in what is put into a category that says no further action. Now, no further action can mean many things, but no further action against the practitioner.
Perhaps we could just move on to another questioner, because I can see some other people, and you could perhaps approach the panel after the session finishes. So I think there's one up the top there.
Yeah. Hello, my name's Dr. Alison Blight. I'm a palliative care physician, and I'm also a senior pain medicine fellow. So I have the joys of being part of 2 colleges. The College of Anaesthetists last week also brought up issues with doctors' mental health, and this has particularly come from the loss of our trainees and many, very valuable individuals in our profession. One question, and thank you, Gordon and Marie, very much for sharing your stories. A quick question for Stephen. I'm very mindful of the mandatory reporting, why that's come about, and for the safety of the public, and also for those practitioners who don't have insight and are genuinely dangerous. My concern is that what I have witnessed is the use of threats to report trainees and some other doctors to the medical board being used as a bullying technique. In particular, because some managers and some nurse managers have realised they can report, and they're using it as a technique to bully junior doctors. Even when you reassure us that the standards are quite high for mandatory reporting, for a trainee, that's very threatening, and that's very worrying, that this strategy of saying, well, we might need to report you to the medical board, when there is no valid reason for that trainee to need to be reported at all. And the trainee is very confused by that and threatened by that, and they don't know where to go with that. And I have literally seen this happen to colleagues of mine, and I said, they can't do that to you. But my reassurance means nothing. It means nothing to them. Is there a way of feeding back, or to actually having some way of saying, look, this is, that one, if vexatious complaints are made, or letting people know that those threats are being made and they need to be pulled up. So I guess for directors of departments in the medical system, if you're being instructed by administration to tell your trainees that, can you please say no? Because I have seen that event happen.
So
And
perhaps
if you,
we could get Stephen to answer your question.
So look, I totally agree that absolutely shouldn't happen. It's a workplace issue. It's a workplace culture issue. There is a lot of work going on in various colleges about exactly that, about the relationship of supervisors and trainees, and about being intolerant and not accepting bullying behaviour. If that sort of report did come to the medical board, it would be dismissed as a cause for a complaint to the medical board and referred back as no further action, because whatever the problem is would be a workplace issue, and I don't know whether I can give you any further, and so that's why I'm here talking about it, to reassure everybody that that is what happens.
For people who are interested in vexatious reports, Jennifer Morris, who some of you may have heard speak yesterday, and I have recently done a literature review of vexatious reports, which is available through the AHPRA website, I believe. So the bottom line is that vexatious reports are extremely rare. When they do occur, they're usually motivated by a relationship breakdown between 2 people. The medical board are very interested in improving their processes for identifying them and shutting them down quickly. There are potentially consequences for a practitioner who makes a report in bad faith. So, it's not a completely consequence-free thing to do. And there are also mechanisms whereby if you're genuinely concerned that somebody is going to make a vexatious report about you, that you can actually proactively contact AHPRA or the medical board to let them know what the circumstances are if you feel that would be a helpful thing to do. But certainly if you're interested, have a look at the report on vexatious reports that should be on the AHPRA website.
I think
Jeff,
I think there's probably a step before that, because that's assuming that the vexatious report has been put in. If I were to hear from a staff member that another staff member had made that threat, I would direct the recipient to go straight to the HR department and report it immediately and offer full support. I'd probably even accompany that person. So I think, you know, it should be initially handled in-house and settled very quickly.
The only other thing I would add is, you know, if somebody tells you that they've been subject to a vexatious report, to just sometimes take that with a grain of salt. You know, having worked in this field for a long time, I have had practitioners phone me to tell me that they've been subject to a vexatious report. I'm sure this is not your situation, but in other circumstances, to say they've been subject to a vexatious report, and after an hour of them shouting down the phone at me, I completely understand why the report was actually made. So, you know, as I said earlier, you know, there are some practitioners who have a lack of insight into their deficiencies and will sometimes believe that they've been unfairly targeted when in fact there are grounds for a report to be made. But you know, I realise that's not your situation, but just as a general comment, if you hear about vexatious reports, it actually helps to know what the facts behind that are.
Yeah, Jeff?
I'd probably be on your side up there. I think there is, I'm not saying there's not vexatious reports, but it's the threat of vexatious reports, and it's the sort of, you know, the threatening potential to your career. As a head of department, I wouldn't have tolerated it. I must suggest I'm not a great ambassador for the HR departments of hospitals, because they work for the executives, and the very executives that abuse me. So I'd go outside. I went along to report someone above me. I'm not having a go. I went along to report someone above me, and they said, "Who are you reporting?" And their face just dropped, because they were a much more senior executive in the hospital. And it was about, you know, they then encouraged whether I should still stay at the hospital.
So we have another question up the top.
Yes, hello, it's Mike Ackland here. I'm a public health physician. I want to start by saying thank you very much to Jeff and to Marie for your courageous stories. I know from personal experience that such stories make a very big difference to people that are perhaps on the edge, and it gives them courage to talk about their stories as well. So you've done a tremendous amount of good telling your stories today, so thank you. But the thing I want to say is that I'm a little bit struck by the fact that we're dealing with a problem and a sort of a solution to the problem in broad terms today. I'm also struck by the fact that AHPRA tends to be seen by many practitioners as a sort of a summative organisation, if I may say it that way, that tends to come down on doctors that have done the wrong thing or are reported one way or the other. The thing that seems to be a little bit missing from the narrative, from my perspective, is a story about health promotion and prevention for medical practitioners who are sort of on the cusp of having a mental health disorder. And I'm wondering what the right approach to this is. Yes, it might be about having doctors tell their stories. It may be about working through our community of practice in the college. It may be about AHPRA taking an alternative approach. It may be that I'm just blind to something. But I'm wondering if one of you might be able to comment on that. I'm not quite sure who to ask, but
Perhaps-
it seems to be an important thing.
Perhaps the whole panel can answer your question.
I really agree with Jeff's comment earlier that as a junior doctor in a first year registrar role, what I do not need is a resilience workshop that runs during my lunch hour or at 6 p.m. You know, I really think that we need to be lifting our gaze and looking for more systematic solutions. I think that the fact that you can't take sick leave as a junior doctor without placing an incredible burden on your colleagues, or meaning that patients are missing out on care, is a real problem. It's been wonderful to see some hospitals in New South Wales addressing that by actually having sick leave cover available. I think this morning we all heard about the importance about flexible work arrangements for parents of young children. I think there are a lot of solutions, and many of them should be coming from colleges and employers rather than asking practitioners to attend a yoga workshop during their lunch hour.
I think another option is to have a key person as a contact in whatever the organisation is. So at the University of New South Wales, where I am, we have this most wonderful woman, Uta Volnakona, who's looking after 120 medical students at any one time. The rate hasn't changed much in the last 3 years. They know that they can go to her and she will be respecting of confidential material. She'll work out what is their need, what is their priority, and essentially she triages them to who she thinks may best handle their scenario. And that has been quite magnificent. It's also acted as a big destigmatisation of psychiatric problems in the students. So I think that's one option, rather than having messages around the wall such as "We care for you," like the Commonwealth Bank.
Lorna?
I agree absolutely with Marie. I think, as I say, in our hospital, it's kind of cynical to be putting on these extra things like, or maybe a staff counsellor or a bit of occupational health or this or that. It's kind of cynical when you don't have the manpower or womanpower on the ground to actually do the work. It's because most people who come into medicine and get through are reasonably resilient, even getting through med school. And people are now even daring to suggest that we should be looking at the entrance to medical school and screening out the people who aren't going to be resilient. I mean, what sort of Aryan race of doctors are we looking to breed? It's, the last time I gave this talk about a week ago, somebody stood up from the UK who works with the GMC and sort of asked that question, well, what should we be doing to get back in before they come into medical school? And yes, I think systemic solutions are the one-to-one solutions are helpful for individual cases. Yes, we can all learn a lot more about mental health and well-being and building resilience. That's probably a societal need rather than just for doctors. But I do think we need to start working very early on in medical school, because it's extraordinary how early on in medical school we become inculcated with the professional badge of honour, I'm really very strong, I can't show any weakness, I can't be sick. It starts very, very early on in medical school, and all the literature shows that. So I think we do need to look at medical students and start very, very early on having workshops and conversations around this and building it in and integrating it into our medical student training. But certainly I don't think we should be going back anywhere earlier than that, because we all know that doctors with vulnerabilities and those who have been treated for illnesses often bring the most essential traits that are needed to be good, caring, empathic physicians. But we do need to look at more systemic solutions, and I think any of the recent sort of big reviews on burnout as one measure of people, if you like, falling through the cracks shows that there are many, many studies on individual interventions and very few on systemic interventions, and the evidence suggests that the systemic interventions are much more effective. So if we're looking for a bang for our buck, and unfortunately we are also, we like to do everything, but the resources are limited, we have to look at the systems and some of the things you've suggested there, Marie, about my nephew worked in Perth and was he's a young Irish doctor. He's on his way back to Ireland now. But we couldn't believe it when we heard it over in Ireland that he had been recruited into one of these jobs where he was paid to cover people who were sick. So he spent a lot of time working, but he also spent some time paid on the beach. We were incredulous.
Thank you.
That's one small gesture.
Marie's thoughts. I mean, look, we don't have that's the part of the support, part of the time-space support of, we run at margins. So if a resident's sick or registrar's sick or consultant's sick, who covers them? I remember sitting in my GP's, I went into my GP's surgery suicidal and was crying. And then she said, well, you can't go to work tomorrow. And I said, well, who's going to do the on-call and who's going to do the list? She said, I'll ring up and find out. I rang up and cancel it. And then the person on the other end of the phone wanted to know what was wrong with me. So I still wanted to go to work because I let my colleagues down.
Well,
that's a kind of inbred culture which I'm sure everyone has here. And then certainly you have these cultural issues where people remind me of how they covered for me and helped me in the 2 or 3 or 4 weeks that I was off sick, you know. Jesus.
I think at least if you've got good occupational health, there is that generic thing. When Gordon writes a letter in, it's perfectly obvious that he's writing about a doctor with a mental health issue. If I'm writing in or ringing or emailing medical manpower, I don't give any information. It's very generic, and it could be anything. It could be that they've, had a physical health problem and they're recovering from that, and so on.
Yes. Good. So we have another question from over here.
Hello, my name is Nyasha Magoche. I'm a general physician in Brisbane, and I am also an Irish graduate, even though I don't look it. I guess, I think in a sense, you've all answered the question I'm to ask, and in some ways it's directed to Jeff and to Blonade. It's along the lines of, system change, that I think the system needs to be disrupted because I think as long as we're working the same way we are, nothing's going to change. Jeff, what you shared about when you were at that crisis point, accessing leave, how difficult that was. So I guess, Blonade, on the work that you've done in Ireland, do you have a feel on whether, in the situation of the doctors who were suicidal, or even where you've got burnout and so on, whether the factors are external to work, or they're as a result of work, or it's a combination of both? Because I think that we can put posters about we care about how you are, dear doctors, all we want, but if the work structure isn't such that people can take time off, etc., whether it's because of issues outside work or issues inside work, nothing's going to change. So I think the big thing while we're looking at systems changes, I think it now falls on, it has to change from the top down, from heads of department and so on is my feeling. But I suppose there's many questions and comments in there.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your comment, and you'd be a perfect candidate to be. I don't know if you were at my talk this morning. That my colleague Niamh Humphreys, who's doing work on Irish graduates working in Australia. I think, there's a couple of strands there. You mentioned suicidality, and actually, I'm going to say this because we have a psychiatrist on the panel here. I wasn't allowed to ask, well, that's a bit strong. I was discouraged in our survey from asking about suicidal ideation. We will certainly be asking it in the next one. So that wasn't a question we asked in the survey. And because it was a quantitative survey with all of these instruments, there was very little scope for delving into some of that detail. However, we did have a free page, the back page as I call it, even though the survey could be done electronically as well. And we're analysing all of that. And there is a lot of really rich qualitative material coming out of that, which will be published later this year. My colleague Niamh Humphreys, who I refer to as the Queen of Qual, she's analysing that. The other person who was involved in the study is another colleague who's non-medical, although she has a sister, interestingly, who's an anaesthetist, Gillian Walsh, and she has done some interviews, not just some interviews, she's interviewed 16 consultants and trainees, very, very in-depth, and she's currently writing up her work on that as a PhD. And, an awful lot of it seems to be about work. Now, I know until we do the longitudinal studies and look for, to really show causality, we can't, we can pull from all of these sources of data, and the truth is, I think that we know what we know, and when we do the research and publish it, it affirms very often what we know. I think a lot of this is to do with work, but I don't think we can stand up and say that the links are absolutely causal, because we haven't got that kind of evidence. But we've got very, very strong associations. We've got we have a lot of good qualitative material emerging. And I think a lot of these people are people who have survived great adversity, even in medical school, and then they come through and they crash, because simply what we expect of them is that they are robotic, and they're not robotic, because you don't succeed in medicine really at a junior level if you're just a robot. So I can't answer your question definitively, but my sense is from our population is that there's a lot of the distress that's generated by work, but a certain caveat over that statement in terms of evidence, yeah.
Thank you. Any other comments? No. So we've reached the end of the session, and have to congratulate all the speakers on their timing, but also on an extremely interesting, thought-provoking presentation, which disrupts many thoughts and gives us a lot to think about. So I would like you all to join me in thanking all the speakers, including Bláthnaid Hayes, for their contribution today.